House with his reporting. Hi, Jeff.
Good morning, Allison. You're right. Lawmakers will be questioning Donald Trump Jr., the president's oldest son, for the first time in this Russia investigation. A top question on their list, of course, is that meeting at Trump Tower back in June of 2016 with Russian operatives. But it is those new revelations about Michael Flynn's lies to the FBI that's raising new questions this morning about whether Vice President Mike Pence knew or how he managed to stay in the dark about those Russia contacts. New questions about how or whether Vice President Pence could have remained in the dark over Michael Flynn's talks with the former Russian ambassador. It's causing anxiety within the vice president's inner circle that he'll eventually be called for an interview with special counsel Robert Mueller. They are preparing for that, one Republican close to Pence told CNN. Court documents unsealed last week show several Trump advisors talked to Flynn about his calls with then Russian ambassador Sergei Kislyak over U.S. sanctions, even as Pence's aides still insist the vice president was unaware. How some of Trump's top confidants could have known, while Pence, who at the time was leading the Trump transition team, did not, is a mystery hanging over the Russia investigation. A review of a timeline of the events raises more questions than it answers. On December 20th, Pence holds a national security meeting at the transition offices in Washington. On December 28th, the day President Obama approved new sanctions against Russia for meddling in the 2016 election, President-elect Trump said this.
What do you think generally about sanctions against Russia?
I think we ought to get on with our lives.
On December 29th, while Pence was in Indiana preparing for his son's wedding, Flynn calls K.T. McFarland, who was at Mar-a-Lago with other transition officials, to discuss Russia sanctions. Flynn then calls Kislyak to talk about sanctions. And finally, Flynn calls McFarland back to discuss the Kislyak phone call. 16 days later, on January 14th, Pence calls Flynn to personally ask about his calls with Kislyak. On January 15th, Pence goes on television.
I talked to General Flynn yesterday, and the conversations that took place at that time were not in any way related to new U.S. sanctions against Russia or the expulsion of diplomats. And they did not discuss anything having to do with the United States' decision to expel diplomats or impose a censure against Russia. So General Flynn has been in touch with diplomatic leaders and security leaders in some 30 countries. That's exactly what the incoming National Security Advisor should do.
5 days later, on January 20th, Trump is sworn in as the 45th President of the United States. Pence is sworn in as Vice President. On February 9th, the Washington Post story reveals Flynn did, in fact, discuss sanctions with Kislyak. 4 days later, on February 13th, Trump fires Flynn. 3 days after that, on February 16th, the president offered his reasoning for Flynn's dismissal.
He didn't tell the Vice President of the United States the facts, and then he didn't remember, and that just wasn't acceptable to me.
Now, the vice president's office still maintains that he did not know about any of this. We talked to 7 officials who worked for the vice president at the time and some who still work for him, and they say he simply did not know about this. He was not read in on any of those discussions here. But it raises the question of, can the vice president maintain his credibility by being in the loop for these conversations and still, answer questions of how he could not have known about any of this? So the reason that this matters is Flynn, we know now, lied to the vice president. He's cooperating, of course, with the special counsel's office. As this investigation comes closer to the president's inner circle, will the vice president be called to testify or ask some of these questions about how he could not have known? That, of course, is coming up later, but most urgently is that meeting on Capitol Hill today with Donald Trump Jr.
All right, Jeff Zeleny, thank you very much for the reporting.